I am here as a lost soul, according to your notion. According to your religious view, which I don't really know particularly well, I'm going to guess that I am desperately in need of the truth about Jesus, or my soul is damned to elimination or hell. I don't know if you believe in a literal hell or what. And yet, when I ask you to provide evidence for a miracle, your answer is the resurrection is historically confirmed enough to suit you.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Really glad you are here for this one because this might be one of the most fascinating conversations I have ever reacted to. So here is the setup. We have Ben Fischer, a Christian minister, who came into this debate claiming he has strong evidence for the existence of God. And on the other side, we have Matt Dillahunty, a longtime atheist debater who has spent years asking one simple question. Show me the evidence. What happens when those two sit down together is something I genuinely did not expect, and I think it is going to make you think regardless of where you stand. Stay all the way to the end, because the moment this builds toward is the kind of thing that is very hard to unsee once you watch it. Also, I want to know, where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I always love seeing how far this reaches, and it genuinely means a lot every single time someone takes a second to do that. All right, let us get into it.
I don't see why not either. But if God is detectable, then you don't need an axiom. What you need is evidence. So yes, what is something that God can do that we can empirically verify?
Yeah, I would say that miracles would be an example of this, but getting back to the argument for God's existence, I think that you can easily force any sign, wonder, or miracle that you see into an infinite regress of proofs. No reason not to. You've got that option, or you can just simply try to argue from some other presupposed basis of coherence.
It'd be really great if you didn't spend nearly so much time trying to anticipate what my objection is going to be and just have the discussion. Okay, your entire opening was an anticipation of what you thought a religious skeptic was going to say. It literally had nothing to do with my position or this debate at all. And now I'm asking, can God do something in reality that is detectable? And you say, yes, miracles. But before I can even start to talk about this, you're immediately anticipating what objections are going to be. Please identify some miracle that we can reasonably attribute to a God.
Well, you're asking for a miracle that you and I can reasonably attribute to God. I'm assuming that you want a miracle that happens right in front of us.
I'd love for you to give any example of any miracle, because I hear lots of claims about miracles. I have yet to hear about any miracle that has actually been verified.
And has actually been verified.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the arguments for the resurrection of Jesus are fairly stable.
The resurrection of Jesus hasn't been verified.
That depends on what you are demanding as a reasonable grounds for verification. And I think that essentially the problem that I see is that in many cases, and I don't know if this is the case with you, so I won't suppose on the front end that this is the way that you see things, but many atheists and skeptics seem to suggest that that all these arguments from history, historical arguments, are based on induction.
I promise.
Not deduction.
I'm trying to be as patient as I can. Please stop debating other atheists that aren't here and have the conversation with the one that's here. I'm not here to defend what other atheists believe. All I've asked is provide evidence for a miracle, and you are now talking about what other atheists believe. How is that relevant to you providing evidence for a miracle?
Sure. Well, I think that the evidence for the miracle of the resurrection is fairly strong because it's been historically substantiated, and that's good enough, it seems. Otherwise, it seems to me...
Now, I want to make sure we're clear, because there's a soundbite right there where I asked you for a miracle, and your statement is the evidence for the resurrection is historical, and that's good enough for you. You didn't provide any evidence. You just, once again, told me what you're convinced of. How can I, and I swear I'm not trying to be obtuse. I am here as a lost soul, according to your notion. According to your religious view, which I don't really know particularly well, I'm going to guess that I am desperately in need of the truth about Jesus, or my soul is damned to elimination or hell. I don't know if you believe in a literal hell or what. And yet when I ask you to provide evidence for a miracle, your answer is the resurrection is historically confirmed enough to suit you.
Yes, I think it's. Okay. I think it should.
Then I don't know what we have to talk about, because you're not presenting any evidence in your opening. You're not presenting any evidence in this discussion. You're just once again restating that you are in fact convinced of something.
I haven't gotten around to saying particularly what the evidence is. I can.
We've been debating for almost an hour. The whole purpose of the debate was to present evidence for God. How could you possibly say I haven't gotten around to it yet?
This is the moment the entire debate changes direction. Because Matt Dillahunty cuts through every philosophical framework Ben had spent the opening building. And he does it with one single question. If God is detectable in the real world, you do not need abstract reasoning to justify believing in him. You would just have empirical evidence. So what can God actually do that we can point to and examine? You have to understand why that question is so effective. Ben had constructed this entire architecture around epistemology and skepticism. And Matt essentially said, none of that matters if God leaves a footprint in reality. Show me the footprint. And Ben says, yes, miracles. The moment he says that, the conversation shifts from philosophy into something far more concrete. Because now we are not talking about abstract frameworks anymore. We are talking about the real world. Point to the miracle. Let us look at it together. So Matt does exactly that. He asks Ben to identify a specific miracle that can be reasonably examined. And Ben points to the resurrection of Jesus, saying the arguments for it are historically substantiated and that is sufficient. I want you to really think about what just happened there. The debate topic was whether there is good evidence for God. Not persuasive arguments, not historical traditions, good evidence. And the answer offered is essentially, I find the historical case convincing. Here is something worth understanding that most people watching debates like this overlook. In both philosophy and legal reasoning, there is a foundational distinction between testimony and evidence. Testimony is an account of something that happened. Evidence is something independently examinable and verifiable. Historical written accounts describing an event are testimony. That distinction has been central to Western intellectual tradition since at least the 18th century, when philosopher David Hume argued that claims of miraculous events require a level of corroboration proportional to how far outside normal experience those claims sit. Matt understands this distinction deeply, which is why he keeps pressing, and then Ben says something that genuinely stops the conversation. He says he has not gotten around to stating what the evidence actually is, nearly an hour into a debate specifically about evidence for God. Matt's response is measured but direct. The entire purpose of this conversation was to present that evidence. How is it possible that after this much time, it has not been presented yet?
Because that seems ridiculous.
No, I do believe that I've gotten around to the notion that I think we have a good reason to suppose on the basis of an axiomatic demonstration that God exists. That's the topic for tonight's discussion, and that's what I've come ready to speak into.
But you haven't presented any evidence, and you're wanting to accept it axiomatically, which means that now we're not even having a debate.
Well, I would say that the other two options that we have in the trilemma I just mentioned are unfavorable, and I think that perhaps you would say that that's true as well.
The trilemma you just talked about, infinitism, coherentism, and foundationism, are about epistemology. They are not about a God.
Sure,
you've barely spoken. You have barely spoken about a God. And now when I say, where's the evidence? You say, well, there's only those three possibilities. Well, first of all, I already acknowledged that maybe there aren't. I don't care if you see any others. I just pointed you to Susan Hawk's foundationism. But in the end of the day, no matter which epistemological model you use, there's either evidence for a God or there's not. And there's either good evidence for a God or there's not. Are you ever planning to present good evidence for a God, which was the purpose of this debate?
I think that essentially what I've come into this discussion to do is to simply show that there are good reasons to believe that God exists, and that I think that axiomatic demonstrations are the strongest form of
then I have nothing more to say, because
could have.
If we didn't agree on a debate of, hey, can I come up with a good reason to believe in a God, and the only thing that I have to do is say that I'm convinced it's good. The issue here under debate was, is there good evidence for God? If we're not going to talk about evidence,
that does depend on the type of evidence that you're willing to accept. It doesn't
matter what evidence depends on, you have to actually present it. If you're not going to present evidence for the existence of God, then we should have had a debate about epistemology, which I'm happy to do. I just did a couple of weeks ago. But if I would agree to do a debate on epistemology, then we could discuss that. But if you're going to say, I'm going to come in and debate Matt Dillahunty on whether or not there's good evidence for God, and I'm not going to present any evidence, good or otherwise, and I'm just going to say that it's axiomatic, and that I don't see anything newer or more reliable than what a second century Greek thought about epistemology, I don't know what to say. There's nothing more to do. My job here is to point out why I either accept or reject your evidence. But if you're not going to present evidence, then we're wasting time and might as well just go to questions.
This might be an interesting question to ask, is what is the reason to suppose that an axiomatic demonstration is somehow a faulty reason or suspect reason to believe in the existence of God?
Because it needs to be supported by evidence. You can't, there's no God belief that one could propose that one couldn't accept axiomatically. I could axiomatically accept Allah, Yahweh, whatever model Scientology is. It doesn't even have to be a God. I could axiomatically accept any one of those. I'm concerned with whether or not there's evidence and whether or not there's good evidence. And I was told that I was coming to a debate about whether or not there's good evidence. And now you're not presenting any good or otherwise and saying that it's unnecessary because it being axiomatic is enough. Now, if something's axiomatic,
seems that that's true.
If something's axiomatic, there's no debate.
Well, I think that you would be in a position to say whether or not you agree that type of demonstration is good enough to persuade you, Matt Dillahunty, for the existence of a God, that since it seems that we don't have a good grounds for launching an argument which says that this isn't true, and I don't think that I've heard one.
And here is where it gets genuinely fascinating, because Ben's answer to being called out is not to finally present the evidence. His answer is to reframe the axiomatic argument as though it already was the evidence all along. Let me break this down clearly, because it actually matters for understanding what is happening here. In philosophy, an axiom is a statement accepted as a starting point, not because it has been independently proven, but because it is treated as foundationally self-evident. Think of it as the ground floor of a building. You do not prove the ground floor exists. You simply begin construction on top of it. Ben's position is that God's existence functions like that ground floor. It does not require demonstration. It is simply where reasoning begins. And Matt's counter to this is one of the most logically clean responses you will hear in a conversation like this. He points out that the moment you classify something as axiomatic, you are effectively acknowledging that independent evidence for it does not exist. Because if good evidence existed, you would not need to assume the conclusion. You would demonstrate it. That is not a rhetorical move. It is a genuinely sound observation. We do not treat gravity as axiomatic. We demonstrate it. We do not treat the age of the universe as axiomatic. We have accumulated centuries of converging independent evidence pointing toward it. The reason something gets classified as axiomatic is precisely because demonstration is unavailable. And this is the part that I think is most important to sit with. Ben came into a debate specifically framed around good evidence for God, and the position that emerged is, I cannot independently demonstrate it, but I also cannot justify not assuming it. That is a philosophical position. It is not evidence. What makes this even more telling is that Matt actually offers Ben a clean and respectful alternative. If this is really a debate about epistemology, let us have that debate. That would be a legitimate and interesting conversation. But that was not the agreement. And the fact that the discussion kept gravitating toward pure epistemological theory rather than anything empirically examinable tells you something meaningful about what happens when the evidence portion of an argument has no clear foundation to stand on.
Then I would
You
say
already
that,
agreed. You don't get to do this. You don't get to say you haven't heard an argument against God when we already established at the outset and you agreed that the burden of proof is on you. It's not up to me to prove there is no God.
I think that it's best to say that in any discussion, one way or the other, I do not view the standpoint of atheism as being something that is somehow epistemically neutral.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm defending my position. The debate here is that you either have good evidence for the existence of God, which I then either acknowledge is good evidence, or I say it's not good evidence and here's why. But I'm not in any position where I'm required to prove that a God doesn't exist. In both in real life, with the fact of me being an atheist and putting the burden of proof where it's supposed to be, based on proper epistemology. However, in this debate, the debate is there good evidence? Now, I'm going to ask this just one last time, and then maybe we'll just go on to questions from the audience. Are you going to present actual evidence for a God?
Either way. I think that I have shown that there are three possibilities, three major possibilities, and I already did mention the combination of coherentism and foundationalism in my explanation. And I think I said that there are these three possibilities that we might entertain on how to establish evidence of any kind or some sort of a demonstration of any kind. I think this is a fairly good one. It seems to me that it's fairly strong. I haven't heard any good arguments against it. And so I think that because it seems to stand up the way that it does to questioning, that it's a fairly sturdy grounds for believing that God exists.
Okay.
Yeah.
Congrats. But you've presented no evidence.
Maybe.
And if the debate is about good evidence, you don't just get to say it's axiomatic. That's not what evidence is.
I think that this is one form of evidence that we have to choose from. We have to choose from one of the three. And we don't have any other options.
So you keep doing this. You're so obsessed. You are so obsessed. You are so obsessed over these three categories of epistemology, despite the fact that they may or may not be exhaustive, that it doesn't matter which one of those is true.
Is enough to see.
Wow. It doesn't matter which one of those is true, or even if there's another option or not. Whatever epistemology.
I don't think that doesn't seem like there is.
Am I going to be able to finish?
I apologize. Please do finish.
I let you talk for a long time, and I got nothing. No evidence, just, hey, there's only three ways to look at knowledge. And it can't be this, and it can't be this, therefore God is axiomatic. Well, first of all, that's not an argument. You've presented no argument with no structure. And in a debate about whether or not there's good evidence, you presented no evidence and just asserted it's axiomatic. So, I mean, I don't look at debates as win-lose, but this is a lose for you under all the criteria of the debate. Because I came in to debate, is there good evidence for God? And you came in to say, there isn't, but it's axiomatic. Okay, congrats.
And then Ben responds to Matt's full assessment by saying he finds the argument good and persuasive. That moment is worth pausing on. Matt had just walked through systematically, no formal premises, no structured conclusion, no independently examinable evidence presented. And the response is essentially an agreement that it was a well-made case. That is not someone engaging with the challenge. That is someone who has already internally resolved the question and is no longer operating inside the same conversation. And I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. Ben is clearly a thoughtful person who has wrestled seriously with these questions. That comes through in how he speaks, but there is a meaningful difference between personally resolving a question for yourself and being able to present the reasoning behind that resolution in a way that someone else can independently examine and evaluate. Ben arrived at this debate having already answered the question internally. The framework he used to reach that personal resolution simply does not transfer into the format of publicly examinable evidence. And that gap between private conviction and public demonstration is exactly what this entire exchange kept circling around without ever fully closing. Matt's approach throughout was patient and consistent. He was not looking for a fight. He was not trying to embarrass anyone. He kept returning to one straightforward standard: present something I can actually evaluate. And when that never materialized, or he named it plainly for what it was, that kind of intellectual consistency is genuinely rare in these conversations. And regardless of where you personally stand on the question of God's existence, the standard Matt held to show me something I can examine is one that applies to any claim about reality, not just religious ones. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.